Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, priced out of the city. From London to Sao Paulo, Shanghai to Sydney, are we witnessing another property bubble just after the worst financial crisis the world has seen since the 1930s? And beyond that, what sort of pitfalls actually come with buying a house? We look deeper at home ownership and urbanisation, what draws people in as well as the drawbacks. And from its beginnings in Silicon Valley, Twitter makes its multi-billion-dollar market debut. But how do you spot a tech up-and-comer? And where's the life in the sector beyond California? So we're talking property this week, not just the same old stuff about prices and bubbles and mortgages, but rather the idea of where people are buying and living, where they can't buy and live, and all the social and economic factors which take people in and out of home ownership. Because in the end, owning a house is something a lot of people aspire to. Along with family and a job, it's kind of one of life's bedrocks. And you might think, after the worst financial crisis in more than 70 years, that bedrock might be a little shaky. Not so. House prices are in many cases rising faster than the economy. In the United States, the average home value is now within just 7% of the pre-crisis peak. That was $230,400 in July of 2006. In Sydney, Australia, average house prices surged 13% to $718,122 in the year to October 31. China's concerned about a property bubble and social unrest, with house prices up 9.1% in the year to September. And then the real growth markets, Mumbai, India, house prices are up 70% in the past 4 years. Sao Paulo, Brazil, up 181% since January of 2008. And Dubai, remember that crash? Well, prices are up by a third in the last 6 months, but still off their peak of 2008. It all points to another housing bubble, doesn't it? Well, sort of, because if it's a bubble, then it's a bubble for a select few, those with the cash, particularly the foreign investors, who end up skewing the market and making it look better than it is. The reality is the people looking for their bedrock find themselves priced out of the market. We have got 2 reports for you this week on this topic. One is from Gabriel Elizondo in Sao Paulo, Brazil. The first, though, is this feature for Counting the Cost from Lawrence Lee in London.
It's a commonly held truth that people facing a crisis are able to adapt in ways they never thought possible before. So, if you're down and out, then you might well convince yourself that living inside a shipping container isn't as bad as all that, particularly if it's made to feel like it's got some home comforts. This prototype was the idea of a YMCA hostel in East London. It was faced with trying to find somewhere to live for people like Louise, who came to them an impoverished victim of domestic abuse.
It depends on who you are personally. I think living on the streets would probably be a bit more of a dent to the pride than actually living in a shipping container.
If it comes as a surprise that people are making homes in shipping containers in London, usually ranked in the top 2 or 3 best cities in the world to live in, then maybe you should think again. While the economy here is only just emerging, blinking back into the daylight, the property market in London has gone through the sort of growth you'd only normally see in the Chinese economy. Driven by low interest rates, an influx of wealthy foreigners and a lack of housing stock, prices have seen 10% growth and a boom for the construction industry, keen to make the dreams come true for London's young model families. One of the words of the moment here in London is gentrification, the idea that the dilapidated, run-down, old parts of the capital are gradually being replaced into new, shiny-looking places suitable for aspirational, middle-class, hard-working types like this. But the problem is that for an increasingly large number of people, the numbers simply don't work. Supposing these people earn a combination of around $70,000 a year, which is quite a lot of money in London. The average cost of an apartment here is now more than $600,000, and that means the bank would have to lend them 10 times their salary for a mortgage, and no bank in the country will do that. What it means is that unless these people already own a property, they'll never be able to buy one. This huge estate right in the centre of London was due to be knocked down more than a decade ago, and thousands of poor families were moved out while plans were hatched for it to be turned into affordable housing. But the local council couldn't make the sums work, and in the end it surrendered to the developers, who will turn it into yet more $1 million apartments. This man runs a charity which tries to find accommodation for people who can't otherwise break into the property market. And so the people who were moved out of here when this was scheduled for demolition, then you think they're not going to be able to move back in here when it's redone?
There's almost no chance of them being able to move back in here because there's almost no social housing going to be on this estate. So I'm afraid those people have been moved out and won't come here again.
What would your best guess be as to how much an apartment in this complex is going to go for when it's done?
I don't know the figures. A lot of them already been sold off plan, but I mean they are millions. They are expensive apartments. I mean we're 1 mile.
Millions of pounds.
Yeah, they're millions of pounds each. We're 1 mile here from the Houses of Parliament. This is inner London, and this is a graveyard for social housing, really.
There's even steps down into the garden so that the residents of this flat have their own access to their own garden space.
So increasingly the new property bubble means the poor are moved on in favour of the rich. Without any obvious move from the government to stop that trend, one of several solutions being put forward by organisations like this one is to get dilapidated, empty houses before the developers do and offer them to the vulnerable. This one's for battered women.
We should, as a nation, be building more houses than we are. That's the root cause of the problem. But actually, let's use the stock we've got efficiently, or as efficiently as we can, as part of the solution to the big problem. And this is using this stock efficiently to house 2 families in need of somewhere to call home.
The man from the YMCA who came up with the idea of the shipping container as apartment now plans to put dozens of them up in East London. It's both a practical solution to a massive problem as well as an expression of the politics of failure, and he knows it.
I'm so angry I can't even explain it, that in London, whereby we've got such enormous wealth, such opulence, you know, we've got millionaires from all over the world who are buying property up to let out. I mean, most of the property in this borough is now owned by people overseas and then let out at profit. That we've got that, and there's enough to go around. You know, if people shared, if there was justice and fairness, you wouldn't require anything like this. But if we don't do this, there's nothing.
Of course, if you own a property in London already, then it's a different story. It'll most likely mean you can pay for your old age and probably leave something behind. As long as the government's happy to let anyone with money dictate London's housing market, then the bubble won't burst. But in turn, that means the young and the less well-off are being failed by the market, and they will never own a property to fund their pension or healthcare when they get old. This housing bubble will have consequences for children yet to be born.
Damiana Pinto and her son look at the city they can't afford to live in. Pinto and her husband both work, but earn the minimum salary, combined less than $800 a month. The only answer was, with hundreds of other working-class families, to move into this cramped, abandoned building in the center of Sao Paulo. It was taken over by a social movement demanding more affordable housing.
Our family income is very low, and the banks will not approve a loan for a home with minimum salaries. I have tried, but we were denied.
The building is one of dozens in the center of the city occupied by families with no other options. But Brazil is also living through a housing boom, powered by cheap credit, growing wealth, and lots of speculation. Nowhere is it more acute than in Sao Paulo, South America's wealthiest and most expensive city, where new apartment building projects like this one are popping up everywhere. Here, a tiny 2-bedroom in a middle-class neighborhood can sell for nearly $300,000. 75% of the units were snapped up during the first few weeks before construction even began.
Construction companies continue to build every day, but on the other hand, we have millions of people in Sao Paulo and other areas in the country without a home or living in very precarious and risky conditions. And we're seeing all the protests here recently because the inequality has reached a level where the government needs to react.
The city of Sao Paulo is planning 55,000 affordable housing units in the next 4 years, but there are nearly 1 million people in the city still living in precarious conditions. In the shanty town of Parisópolis, rents the past 5 years have increased to where they're now almost double the monthly minimum wage of $350, pushing people like José Luis Santos to occupy neighboring vacant lands to push for more affordable housing units to be built here.
We are fighting for a better house, a better life and standard of living, and a house for my kids, my 5 grandkids, all of whom need a dignified place to live like any other Brazilian citizen.
Brazil is still very much a country of deep social inequalities, where some of the country's poorest people have to occupy this land in shacks such as this just to guarantee a roof over their head. But just on the other side of this wall, there's a street where homes are valued for more than $1 million.
So it's not a good situation, is it? And actually owning your own home comes with its own problems in these times, or so says a new report which we're going to discuss now. The theory that home ownership actually contributes to high unemployment. Let me explain it really simply for you. Let's say that I rent a house right here, right? Now, it's a good location, it's close to my job, everything is good with it. But then my job moves, or I get a new job somewhere else, across town, whatever the circumstances are behind this. It is a bit of an inconvenience, but it's not too much of a stretch for me to think about maybe moving. Renting elsewhere, closer to this job, it makes my life a little bit easier. The catch is, though, according to this report, when I actually buy a house. So we'll go back to my original position here. What was the rented house? It's now my purchased house. I own this one. I am now committed to this area, the people, the schools perhaps. The problem is jobs are drying up in this area. Maybe I actually lose my job, and once again the only employment alternatives are over here across town. I need this job for sure, but think about all the costs now involved. Transport costs, petrol, lost productivity time, earlier starts, all of these things. So it's either I stay where I am here, my purchased house, where there are no jobs, or I incur all sorts of costs in taking a job somewhere else while still owning my own home over here. Well, as we said, that theory was all based on a report about the dangers of home ownership, and the report's author, Andrew Oswald, is joining us now from Warwick University in Coventry in the UK. Andrew, thank you for your time today. Your report is mostly, if not all, US data, I noticed, but do you think the findings hold true for other parts of the world as well?
We do think that the findings will hold and do hold in other parts of the world. We really like looking at the US states over 50 years because it's such a natural laboratory. Those states are very similar to one another in lots of other ways, and we're interested in understanding how different rates of home ownership affect years later the rate of unemployment. Of course, the key finding is a very worrying one for the world, for policymakers. We do think that the same patterns are being found in other countries. Spain, we know, for example, has roughly the highest unemployment rate and nearly the highest home ownership rate anywhere in Europe. Switzerland is at the bottom of the league table, lowest on both. So we believe this is a rather general and really very important finding.
Seeing as you mentioned policymakers, let me ask you about that, because I guess over the years governments have actually helped people to own their own homes with lower interest rates and first homeowner schemes and all those sorts of things. Things to help them get on the property ladder, but in light of what you're saying, has that actually been contributing to the unemployment problem?
Yes, I would say so. We know governments all over the world, almost every government, Switzerland is one exception, but almost every government seems to have the aim of increasing the proportion of people who live in their own homes. And you can think about why there might be some good reasons for that. The difficulty is that there's growing evidence now in the economic data of the world that that high rate of home ownership that so many governments have pushed for is incapacitating, is really weakening the way our labour markets work. So rises in home ownership today seem to produce extraordinarily large and frightening rises in unemployment some years later. Unfortunately, governments haven't understood that, and they've been subsidising home ownership for decades and decades all across the globe.
Right then, let's get into some of the conclusions you came to. I guess one of the most important ones is what you call lower labour mobility. Now, I of course don't want to simplify your research too much,
yes,
but am I right in saying you're talking about people, buying a home, but becoming anchored to that home and that life and that area and the schools and all the things there, and therefore feel they can't move around to go where the jobs are?
Yes, that's a big part of it. We know that when you buy a home, you tend to have an anchor around you for many, many years. You choose to attach that anchor to yourself. That slows you down. What we're finding, interestingly, is something more than that, and something really interesting for research economists all over the world, and that is that my mobility, if I live in an area, is reduced even if my neighbours are homeowners. There's some kind of spillover effect onto my moving around the country, caused by not just whether I'm an owner or a renter, but very remarkably by what everyone else is doing. There's some sort of, economists would call it an externality, there's some kind of spillover effect that's causing a sort of giant glue all across the economy, slowing things down when a large proportion of people own their own home.
But none of this is to say actually that renting is the answer, is it? Because I've certainly always thought of renting as throwing away good money in a way.
I don't think you should see renting as throwing away good money. You can live in two different kinds of ways. Think of countries like Germany and Switzerland, where a very big proportion of citizens are renters and very prosperous renters. In principle, you can choose the kind of tenure, being an owner or being a renter, that you want, and you might think it's much more natural at the end of people's lives for individuals and families to own their own homes. If they're renters in their youth and their middle age, then they can move around much more easily for jobs and all sorts of things that help deep down the efficiency of the economy. I think we need more renting. Our data are suggesting that renting gives a kind of dynamism to the way the whole economy works, interestingly. And that's not been understood by policymakers, and until recently it's not been understood by research economists.
Andrew Oswald, very interesting to talk to you and to discuss your report. Thank you for your time.
It's a great pleasure.
Now to our other story this week, the most anticipated technology market listing since Facebook went public last year. That is it, of course, the loss-making, we should say, social network, which we all know as Twitter. It raised more than $2 billion in its IPO, with its shares valued at $26 each, but then it listed and went absolutely crazy. It surged 73% to $44.90, valuing the company at $30 billion, a complete opposite of what happened to Facebook when it listed. Its stock was a flop on opening day, lost value, and took more than a year to recover. But frankly, Twitter, like Facebook before it, is just the headline here. It is a company which is listing on a stock exchange, and that happens quite often. We want to look at how these companies are made, who spots them in their infancy. So we're going to go to London and talk to Saul Klein. He is a partner at Index Ventures, which goes out looking for tech startups to invest in. Saul, thank you for your time. Just give me a quick thought, if you would, first of all, on Twitter. Is this a good thing, given that social tech companies often start out wanting to be non-corporate and non-profit driven, but then they go and list like this? Does it affect the DNA of the sector?
I think Twitter is probably one of the most new forms of media and communications that's emerged over the last 20, 30 years. So you don't really start a new medium you know, in a year or 2 years or 3 years. It takes time, and as such, you know, it takes time to build a great business. So I think, you know, part of Twitter's natural evolution is to, you know, generate significant revenues, which it's doing, build a large distributed employee base, which it's doing, and also to access the capital markets, which it's now done. So I think, you know, the journey for Twitter is still at the beginning, and it's really an incredibly important now business, and not just an incredibly important new medium and idea. So it's very, very exciting, I think.
This is what you do for a living, though. You go out there looking for companies to invest in, looking for these startup companies, which could be the next big thing. How do you spot one? Is there an element of luck involved? What do you go looking for?
Well, I mean, venture capital and investing in early stage ideas or early stage businesses is extremely risky. You know, when you look at actually all of the data over the last 25 years, investing in the best funds, in the best businesses, in the best geographies, you know, typically the US, the 62% of the capital that you invest is a write-off. So it is extremely risky. And the things that we look for, I think, are very similar from other investors, is you look for an incredibly passionate entrepreneur and team who have a clear goal and a clear mission. You look for, you know, an enormous market opportunity that they're going after. And then, you know, over time, it's really about the combination of how that team meets that market. You know, are they going to make a product that people love, need, want, are going to pay for? And are they fishing in a pool that is big enough that if the stars align, they're going to have an extraordinary outcome?
So let's talk about geography here, because the default knee-jerk reaction when you talk about anything to do with tech or tech startups is to say, you know, Silicon Valley, California. You've got Silicon Roundabout, I believe they call it, in London. Tell me about, I guess, how you're trying to turn that into its own hub. What sort of success companies are having there?
Well, look, I think if you wind the clock back, you know, the tech industry as we know it is sort of a 50, 60-year-old industry that's grown up in and around Silicon Valley. And in the sort of the major tectonic shifts in technology, first semiconductors, then hardware, then software, then the internet, Silicon Valley was really sort of at the epicenter of finding and funding those businesses. Today, the internet is 3 billion strong, and it's no longer a US internet. So I think as a result, you know, you're starting to see, whether it's in London or Berlin or Stockholm or Tel Aviv or many other, you know, hubs around the world, the emergence of some very, very exciting tech clusters. And it's not either or, because Silicon Valley is still, you know, the primary tech cluster globally, and probably will be for my lifetime and even my kids' and my grandkids' lifetime.
Saul Klein from Index Ventures there in London, a major tech investor. We thank you for your time. Do appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
So Saul Klein says it's not just a US game, but he does have an office in Silicon Valley and certainly knows the global game's beating heart is very much there. Paul Davison's part of that scene. He's the CEO and founder of Highlight, a social network app which finds similarly minded users nearby rather than just the ones you know. He's joining us via Skype now to tell us about being a tech startup looking for that investment. Paul, you are in such a crowded marketplace. How tough is it out there to stand out from the crowd?
I think it's a great environment. It's such an exciting time in Silicon Valley. I mean, from mobile sensors to 3D printing to commercial space flight and genome sequencing and memory capture. I mean, there's so many areas of technology that you look at right now and say, wow, that's going to change the world in big, crazy, unpredictable ways that we can't even begin to imagine. And I think a lot of the investors out there see what's happening and they see the potential, the long-term potential of these technologies. And they're really interested in making these long-term bets. I mean, venture is such a hits-driven business. I think companies are looking for the one player that's going to be the next Twitter or Facebook and Google, and they realize that oftentimes these ideas don't seem very reasonable. They don't seem very obvious at the beginning. And so they're looking to make those long-term bets and find the companies that have that same mindset.
Okay, then, so where are you right now then with Highlight? You've got the app out there, but how are you, I guess, sticking your head above all of those other great ideas that you talked about?
Yeah, I think we're in the very early days of a long-term shift in how the world works. I mean, what we want to build is really a sixth sense that helps you see information about all the people who walk past you and sense when people you know are on the other side of a wall. And that's that's a big thing, right? That's going to take some time, and it feels strange to us at first. And when you tell people about Highlight, they're not really sure how to react to it. The social norms haven't been established yet. I'll routinely walk past people on the street who I recognize from Highlight. I've never seen them in the real world, but I know who they are, and it's a strange feeling, and it's fun and exciting. So right now we're a team of 8 people. We launched early last year, and it was just 2 of us, and we've just been really heads down building out the infrastructure and the foundation that we need to turn it from 2 guys with a prototype into a really long-term meaningful thing.
Paul Davison, founder of the app Highlight. Great talking to you, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/business. The latest business headlines are there, plus all of our previous episodes for you to catch up on. And seeing as we've been talking Twitter, you can use that to get in touch with us. @KamalAJE is my name. Our business editor is @AbidOliverAli, or you can drop us an email. Counting the Cost, aljazeera.net is the address. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.